Man City are in a crisis. Or at least that's what you might think had you only seen their fans' reactions on social media after a single loss this week with no other context. So let's talk facts. They're second in the league with an incredible 39 points from just 17 games. Their squad features the best goal scorer in world football and the best creator outside of PSG. They've lost just 5 league games in the last 2 seasons and have won 4 of the last 5 league titles. However, they sit 5 points behind Arsenal, with their ex-players and staff members loving life at the top of the Premier League. Compare that to this stage last season, where the Citizens were an entire 17 points better off than they are now against the Gunners. Not only this, but they've been knocked out of the Carabao Cup by bottom of the league Southampton, with a lineup valued at over 450 million. And most notably, they've got an ageing squad, in which 13 of their 24 first team players are aged 28 and above, and just 2 players are below the age of 22, meaning a hefty rebuild is due in the relatively near future. So I think it's time to ask, are Man City entering an era of crisis, or have their fans just been spoiled with too much glory in recent years? Let's find out. Firstly, let's take a look at the definition of the word crisis and compare them to some other clubs worldwide which have been in a crisis of late. Defined as a time of intense difficulty or danger, it would be very easy to brush City's problems under the carpet and say that of course they're in no danger, but that's actually something I want to talk about again later. However, focusing on some other clubs which have been in crisis recently, we can see the bigger picture as to how big Man City's problems actually are. And if we're talking about powerhouse clubs that found themselves in a sticky situation in the last few years, there's one obvious answer which sticks out like a loyal fan in a Man City shirt, in Pep Guardiola's ex-side Barcelona. And before any City fans start hating in the comments, it was just a joke, chill out. Nobody wants to hear about how your granddad's dog's cousin supported Man City in the 50s, and so it's been in your family for generations. If we take a look at Barcelona following the loss of Neymar to PSG in 2017, and people often point to the expensive and mainly underwhelming signings of Dembele, Coutinho, Griezmann, Malcolm, and so many more as the cause for their downfall and financial issues. And despite the fact that, of course, transfer business was the main factor for their fall, these signings weren't the sole problem. If we take a look at their squad for the season, we can see some very similar themes to that of Man City's in the present day. Firstly, they had just one player under the age of 22, in the form of a 21-year-old Ousmane Dembele, as well as 11 of their 23 players being over the age of 28, with just 3 players under 26 having featured in at least half of their games. Each of these factors being just one fewer than we see in Man City this season. Compare that to just 3 years ago, and City had 6 players who started the season 22 or under, and 10 players 26 or under to start the campaign. And given that the Barcelona side of 2017-18 had won the treble 2 years before the season started, compared to Man City's 19-20 season which saw just a single Carabao Cup triumph, and you can see that there's definitely the potential at the Etihad for a rapid demise and collapse. But here's why that won't happen. Firstly, although on the face of things these two sides look very similar, under the surface there's a million differences. Ever since Bartomeu had become president of the Catalan club, it had been run poorly, with various poor signings being patched together and ignored by the brilliance of the likes of Lionel Messi and Neymar, who'd both been signed before he came to power. As well as this, the fans' ownerships of Spain's big clubs mean that it's impossible for them to be able to spend as much as the likes of PSG, whilst also staying stable and financially sound. Whereas, if we compare that to Man City, it's night and day between the two sides. The Citizens have been run incredibly well for 15 seasons now, with very little reckless spending and nothing that they can't afford, with funds higher than nearly half of the countries in the world's entire GDP backing them. Not only this, but Barcelona had seen 4 different managers in the 6 years before the opening game of the season, compared to City, who've had arguably the best in the world at their helm the entire time, giving them stability and keeping them clear of the supposed danger we see in the definition of crisis. But here's where another problem in this debate arises. In football, what is danger? I'm sure your first thought would be those at the bottom of each division, fighting to stay up with relegation looming over them like a dark cloud until the season draws to a close. Yet, you could argue many of these clubs face a smaller proportionate danger than Man City do right now. For example, Norwich, Fulham and Watford are amongst many who've been titled yo-yo clubs over the years, and despite the fact that we've seen them each be relegated again and again, you can see that each time they fall into the dangerous pit of relegation, they're able to rebound easily and come back up again. Now of course, this is a case-by-case issue, but when we look at those at the top, the danger of slipping away from the pinnacle of football is often so much more precarious and complicated to avoid and recover from, with the likes of Man United, Arsenal and Liverpool all seeing seasons in the last 10 years in which, despite being safe from the danger of relegation, they've been consumed by the danger of falling off from the top, with each team spending more time getting back to the top than it takes for Norwich to jump back up to the Premier League. And so like I mentioned, Danger, particularly in football, is a case-by-case issue. To make an analogy linking it to real life, as a Leyton Orient fan who saw my club months away from extinction in 2017, I can truly say that I've nearly always found myself more happy and content in supporting my team than most of my friends who supported the likes of Arsenal, despite the fact that I was closer to losing it all compared to missing out on the Champions League for a few years. And in my mind, that's because in human nature, it's so often harder to have something taken away from you than to never have it at all. If you told a Man City fan in 2004 that within 20 years they'd have won the Premier League various times, reached the Champions League final once, and would find themselves second in the table behind only Arsenal and ahead of their rivals Man United in the league, they'd have snapped your hand off. But given that they were so much better than these two sides for so long, nowadays City fans react to being on the same level as them as a disgrace and act as if they're in a crisis. So let's answer this question. Are Manchester City in a crisis? Annoyingly, the answer is kinda yes and no. Are they in a difficult situation? Yes, everything about top level football is difficult. Are they in a dangerous situation? Again, you could certainly say they're in a situation where they're dangerously close to no longer being the best team in England anymore. But are they in a more difficult and dangerous situation than the likes of their peers Everton, who are in the relegation zone and have seen years of terrible transfers plague their side? Of course not. Man City are, have been, and will continue to be one of the best teams in the world for this generation. For example, it's still highly plausible they win the treble this year, and so a lot of Man City fans need to calm down and take a step back to look at how strong of a position they're really in. Although, one thing I will say is that this generation of Man City players are coming to an end, and the side are going to have to rebuild. The likes of Kevin De Bruyne, Riyad Mahrez, Jack Grealish, Bernardo Silva, Ilkay Gundogan, Calvin Phillips, João Cancelo, Kyle Walker, Aymeric Laporte, and even potentially John Stones, Manuel Akanji, Nathan Ake and Ederson are all likely to have moved on from Man City come the next World Cup, and they'll need to be replaced. And so this season might be the start of a rebuild at the Etihad, in which silverware won't be seen as often as it had been between 2018 and 2022, but the club will still be more than successful. Barcelona's rebuild took place in the same time frame as Man City's success, and yet they're arguably in a stronger position than they had been in 2018, despite the fact that they were seen to be in a crisis just months ago. Football is an emotional sport, and that goes for the players all the way through to the fans, as well as also being a game in which teams see generations of success and ones of rebuilding, often described as failure. And so despite the answer being much more complicated than a yes or a no, if you force me to answer, do I think Man City are in a crisis? I could only reply by saying no. Although that doesn't necessarily mean it will be the best few years for them either. When Erik ten Hag joined City's rivals United in the summer, he was quoted as saying Man City play fantastic football, but eras of domination come to an end. So in the case of Man City, they're not in a crisis of sorts, more so just entering into an era of transition. And after years of being treated to the best football on the planet, there's a decent chance that the blue side of Manchester are going to have to bite their tongue and watch others be the best, having been spoiled for so long. Thanks for watching, I hope you enjoyed. Two things before I conclude. Throughout this video I was referring to Man City fans, and obviously I was just generalising as it's simply a lot easier. If you genuinely thought I was talking on behalf of all Man City fans, and have written a hate comment somewhere along the lines of, well, not all Man City fans are complaining, stop being stupid. You know what I meant, and it just makes you look childish. And secondly, by no means are Man City definitely going to have to sit back and watch others win everything. In fact, it would not even surprise me in the slightest if they end up being the most successful team in England throughout this rebuild. I was more just making the point that they might not be as good as they have been recently. But finally, like and subscribe if you're new, please follow all my socials, link in description, and most importantly, enjoy your day.